Hello, third grade, and welcome to Unit 4, Week 5. This is the last week of Unit 4, and we're going to be covering a lot of poetry during this week. So we're going to have some of our regular vocabulary words. We're also going to have some specific poetry words that we'll go over as well. Our first vocabulary word is the word weird. Something weird is strange or unusual. So it might be something that has a weird smell, that smells not like anything you're sure about or anything that you know. Or you might hear a weird sound, something you don't know what's like you're hearing a sound, but you're not sure what's making it. Next, we have the word extremely. Extremely means very. So if you're extremely cold, you're very cold. If you're extremely happy, you're very happy. So it's a synonym for the word very. Next, we have the word adventurous. Someone is adventurous when they are willing to risk doing something that may be kind of dangerous in order to have an exciting experience. So adventurous doesn't necessarily always mean safe. And next we have the word courageous. So someone who's courageous is brave. So courage and bravery are synonyms of each other. So a courageous person is a brave person. Now, next we have our poetry words that are going to show up on your selection tests as well. So please make sure you are reviewing these. You have the word stanza. So a stanza is a group of lines in a poem that's like a paragraph. And a poem can have multiple stanzas or multiple groupings of lines. It's the way that we separate sections of a poem. We have the word repetition. Repetition means when things or sounds are being repeated over and over again. So the same phrase or the same word you're seeing over and over again to emphasize or to draw your attention to it, right? The poet, and a poet is an author of a poem. The poet is trying to draw your attention to something. They're telling you, hey, pay attention to this. So they'll say it over and over again. Next, we have rhyme. So when words rhyme, they share the same ending sound. Now, this is not necessarily the same spelling. It just sounds the same. So that's something important to pay attention to. So you can have the words bag and tag, through and blue, and you see these two don't end the same way. Through it ends with EW, blue ends with UE, chart and heart, and so on. So as long as that final sound is the same, those words rhyme. Next, we have the theme. So the theme is like the message that the author is trying to send you in a poem. So the message or the theme might be, keep trying and you'll be able to succeed, or always do the right thing, be honest, work hard, do your best. All those things could be the theme. Next, we have free verse poems. So free verse poems don't need to follow any kind of rhyme pattern. They don't need to follow any specific rules. They're free. They're free to be any which way they want. And they usually show some thoughts and feelings of the author. Now, a narrative poem, something that's very specific to narrative poems is that they tell a story and they always show the writer's thoughts and feelings. You're understanding what the writer or the poet is thinking or feeling about something when they write a narrative poem. And narrative poems generally do rhyme and they have patterns. Now, your spelling words for this week focus on the soft C and the soft G sound. Now, a soft C sounds like the letter S. It says, and a soft G sounds like the letter J. So it says J. It doesn't say G. G is a hard G. So soft C and soft G. Now, when you see a word and you're not sure how to say it, how to pronounce the word, because you're not sure if it's a soft C or a soft G that's in the word, take a look at the letter that comes after it. So after the C or the G, if it has an E, an I, or a Y, so CE, CI, CY, or GE, GI, GY, you make that soft sound. So I bolded the different letters in these words, and I'm going to read them for you. So pay attention to the sound that I'm making when I say them. Pounce, placed, dice, sense, price, space, mice, office, wage, age, gyms, giant, changes, message, pages, your, road, peace, giraffe, and peaceful. So you can see that all of these C's sound like an S, and all of these G's sound like a J because they're making a soft sound. I did also put in some fun videos for you guys to watch about soft C and soft G that I definitely want you to check out. I think you're going to enjoy them, and they'll help you remember these sounds. Now for our ELA and grammar notes, we're going to be focusing on irregular verbs. Now we've talked about these briefly before. Remember, a verb tells you what a subject is or does. And to find the verb, ask yourself, what does the sentence tell us that the subject is or that the subject is doing? So regular past tense verbs end with ed, like walk becomes walked, but not all verbs end in that ed to form the past tense. Irregular verbs, an irregular verb has a special spelling for the past tense. Now, irregular verbs are broken up generally into these three categories. So irregular past tense verbs specifically. They're either written as a different word where the spelling changes. They don't change their form at all, where the word stays exactly the same. Or it will end, that verb will end with an N or EN when it's used with a helping verb before it. So instead of took, we would say has taken. And I'm going to give you several examples of all of those. So these are color coded. So you can see that these pinkish red ones all show a spelling change. And these are ones that you've seen before. Run becomes ran, swim becomes swam, leave becomes left, hear becomes heard. And you can see all of these different words change their spelling completely when they are moved into the past tense form. Now, there are some words that don't change their spelling at all. So cut, set, read, we pronounce it differently. Say we say read and then read, but the spelling doesn't change. Hit, hurt, let, put, quit. So here's read and read. You can see both of them. I actually shouldn't have repeated that. Set, shut, and spread. Now, when we have a helping verb, this is the third option. When we use it with a helping verb, it ends with an N or an EN. So instead of gave, becomes has or have given. Instead of knew, like I knew the answer, becomes or had or have known. Instead of wrote, it becomes written, had or have written, has or had done instead of did, has or have seen instead of saw, has or have taken instead of took. So when we have that helping verb before it, our verb that we're using changes its form, and it usually ends with an N or an EN. So you can come back to this document. I do strongly suggest you come back to this document in this video. Take a look at these words as you're working through your grammar and ELA packets or your grammar and ELA assignments. In case you forget what any of these rules are, in case you forget what any of these different tenses are, or the way that they change, you can come back and double check. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is the comparative and superlative form. So when we're comparing two things, we use the comparative form, ER. In superlative, we're talking about, think the word super, right? The most of anything in a group. Superlative means we're talking about three or more things. So comparative, tall becomes taller, right? He is taller than his brother. Big becomes bigger. This book is bigger than the last one. Fast becomes faster. I can run faster than my sister. So you see all of these, the comparative ER ending is talking about only two things. Now, when we're talking about the superlative, we're talking about super, right? The most out of the entire group. We're talking about three or more things. So clean becomes cleanest. Her room is the cleanest in the whole house. Bright becomes brightest. The sun is one of the brightest stars in the galaxy. Strong becomes strongest. Superman was the strongest superhero of them all. So here you can see that superlative ending, the EST, is talking about when you're comparing three or more things. So I can say he got the highest grade in the class, or she was the fastest runner on the team. So you can see that we're comparing that one thing to a group. Now, an important rule that I want you to remember, because you can see over here when I said big and bigger, you see how I bolded those double G's, even though big only has one G. One of the things that you need to remember is that if your word has a vowel and then a consonant, like in big, vowel is I and the consonant is G, we're going to double that final consonant before we add the ER or the EST ending. So big becomes bigger or biggest, double the G. Sad becomes sadder or saddest, double that D. So if the word ends with a consonant and a Y, so happy, H-A-P-P-Y, P is a consonant, and then Y is your ending, you're going to change that Y to an I before you add the ER or EST. So happier and happiest. Instead of being H-A-P-P-Y, it becomes H-A-P-P-I-E-R or H-A-P-P-I-E-S-T. Another example is the word dry. D-R-Y becomes D-R-I-E-R or D-R-I-E-S-T. Drier or driest. And if the word ends with a silent E, like the word cute, you drop that silent E before you add the ER or the EST. So cute becomes cuter or cutest. Wide becomes wider or widest. And again, come back to this document so you can see these rules, because when you're spelling these words in your assignments, you need to make sure that you're following these rules. Changing the Y to an I when it has a consonant before it, doubling the final consonant when there is a vowel before it, dropping the final E before you add the ER or the EST. So those three rules I need you to remember when you're doing your writing so that you're spelling these words correctly. And the last thing we're going to talk about is figurative language. We're going to focus on metaphors. So metaphors and similes are two kinds of figurative or creative writing that lets us compare two things that are not the same. This is something that's used a lot in poetry because it helps the poet, the author of the poem, who's called a poet, it helps the poet to create some really great visuals or images for us. So when we are visualizing or we're imagining what's going on in the poem, it helps us to create these really beautiful pictures in our imagination. Now, a metaphor compares two things by saying that one thing is the other thing. So when we're comparing two things, we're saying something is or was the other thing. So the snow was a white blanket on the grass. Now, one of the things you need to pay attention to when you're working with similes and metaphors is what is being compared. What is the author talking about? What are the two things that he's trying to say are the same or she's trying to say are the same? So you can usually look around those comparing words. So is, are, was, were, those are all your comparing words. So look what comes before those words and what comes after those words. So the snow was a white blanket on the grass. So we say the snow, it was what? It was a white blanket. So we're comparing the snow to a blanket. Her eyes are sky blue. We're comparing her eyes to the color of the sky. Life is a roller coaster. We're comparing life to a roller coaster. The calm lake surface was a mirror. So I'm comparing the surface of the lake, right? The lake surface to a mirror. So always pay attention to what the author or what the poet is comparing so you can imagine those things as you read along. Let's get into our reading for this week. So our first reading, or our first poem that we're going to read today, is called The Winningest Woman of the Iditarod Dog Sled.
Genre: poetry. The Winningest Woman of the Iditarod dog sled race. Susan Butcher, 1956 to 2006, four-time winner. Essential question: how can others inspire us? Read about people who are courageous. I rode the whole Iditarod from Anchorage to Nome. The husky sleigh, 11-day, Iditarod to Nome. 2 moose can cause a traffic jam. There is no word for moose for scram. And over trails of ice and snow, no musher knows which way to go. The weather, 42 below, could freeze the whiskers in a beard. The huskies up front disappeared. And though it sounds a little weird, okay, you're right, extremely odd, I did Iditarod. A bitter cold Iditarod. My sled slid the Iditarod from Anchorage to Nome. J. Patrick Lewis.
All right, so let's take a look at this poem. Now we're seeing some repetition. We're seeing some rhyme over here, right? So in the first stanza, you can see this first group of lines over here that are separated by a space from the second group of lines. This first stanza says, I rode the whole Iditarod from Anchorage to Nome. The husky sleigh, 11-day, Iditarod to Nome. So we're seeing that repetition. We're seeing that emphasis. She's repeating the locations that they're going to. The second stanza, we're seeing a lot of rhyme at the ends. So 2 moose can cause a traffic jam. There is no word in moose for scram. So jam and scram rhyme. And over trails of ice and snow, no musher knows which way to go. The weather, 42 below, could freeze the whiskers in a beard. So over here we see snow, go, and below. Could freeze the whiskers in a beard. The huskies up front disappeared. And though it sounds a little weird, okay, you're right, extremely odd. I did Iditarod. A bitter cold Iditarod. My sled slid in the Iditarod from Anchorage to Nome. So over here, beard, disappeared, weird, all rhyme. Odd, Iditarod, all have that same odd ending at the end. So those all rhyme as well. So over here, we're seeing repetition. I did Iditarod, right? It's repeating to show you that this is something that the author wants you to pay attention to. It's describing this dog sled race. It's freezing outside. You know, it's so cold and so windy, and the snow is everywhere. You can't see the dogs that are up front because they disappear in that cold snow. So all of these things are helping you to identify or to see things that the poet, that the author thinks are very important. So let's read. First, we read about something in the snow. Now we're going to flip it completely. We're going to read about firefighters, and we're going to read about fire. So I'm going to go the opposite route.
The brave ones. We hear the bell clanging. We come in a hurry. We come with our ladders and hoses. Our hoses. We come in a hurry. To fight the fire, the furious fire. To smother the smoke, the smoke. We don't have much time. We climb, we spray. We are the brave ones who save, who save. We are the brave ones who save. Eloise Greenfield.
So again, here we're seeing that repetition, right? The author is repeating words over and over because they want us to see that those words are important, right? We hear the bell clang. We come in a hurry. We come with our ladders and hoses. Our hoses, we come in a hurry to fight the fire, the furious fire, to smother the smoke, the smoke. We don't have much time. We climb, we spray. We're the brave ones who save, who save. We're the brave ones who save. So you're seeing words repeat over and over, right? The hoses is repeated over and over. Fire is repeated over and over. Smoke. We are the brave ones. We are the brave ones who save, who save. So you're seeing that the author is repeating these different things because they want you to pay close attention to them. These are words that are important, that the author wants you to really look at and think about. Now, our next poem It's called Narcissa.
Narcissa. Some of the girls are playing jacks. Some are playing ball. But small Narcissa is not playing anything at all. Small Narcissa sits upon a brick in her backyard and looks at tiger lilies and shakes her pigtails hard. First, she is an ancient queen in pomp and purple veil. Soon, she is a singing wind, and next, a nightingale. How fine to be Narcissa, a changing like all that, while sitting still as anyone ever sat. Gwendolyn Brooks.
So again, here we're seeing that repetition, but we're also seeing rhyme, right? Some of the girls are playing jacks. Some are playing ball, but small Narcissa is not playing anything at all. So ball and all rhyme. That's the first stanza. The second stanza, you see how they're separated, right, with a space. Narcissa sits upon a brick wall in her backyard, a brick in her backyard, and looks at tiger lilies and shakes her pigtails hard. So yard and hard. We're seeing that second and that fourth line are rhyming in all of the stanzas. So ball and all, that's line 2 and 4 there. Line 2 and 4 in the second stanza. In the third stanza, first she's an ancient queen in pomp and purple veil. Soon she's a singing wind, and next a nightingale. So veil and nightingale also rhyme. How fine to be Narcissa, a changing like all that, while sitting still as anyone ever sat. So you're seeing that repetition, right? The author or the poet wants you to pay attention to just how still she's sitting. She's not moving at all, but she's imagining all of these great elaborate things going on in her head. All right, next we're going to go into your reading and writing workshop. So again, here's your vocabulary. You can open this up in your book to review it on your own. These are the same words that we talked about earlier in our ELA notes. Next, we're going to go into our poems here.
Genre, poetry, Ginger's fingers. Ginger's fingers are shooting stars. They talk of adventurous trips to Mars. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. Ginger's fingers are ocean waves. They talk of fish and deep sea caves. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. Ginger's fingers are butterflies. They talk of a honey gold sunrise. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard.
All right, this poem, Ginger's Fingers. So we're talking about a girl who is, if you pay close attention to the picture, you can see that she's wearing a hearing aid. So this is a girl who's deaf. So when we're talking about Ginger's fingers and all of these things, we're talking about her signing and using sign language. So over here, we're seeing groups of words that rhyme together. So the first and second line, stars and Mars, those rhyme. So Ginger's fingers are shooting stars. So this is a metaphor, right? We're saying her fingers are shooting stars. We're comparing her fingers to stars. They talk of adventurous trips to Mars. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. Now this part is repeated over and over, this little stanza, fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. So we'll have a stanza where the first and second lines, the last word rhymes, and then we'll have this stanza. Then we'll have another stanza where the last words rhyme, and then that will repeat again. So you're seeing that how it's inset 3 times. You're seeing that repetition. Ginger's fingers are ocean waves. So now we're saying her fingers are ocean waves. First we said her fingers are shooting stars. Now we're saying her fingers are ocean waves. They talk of fish and deep sea caves. So waves and caves rhyme. And again, we'll have that repeated stanza. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. Now we're going to go to another stanza. Ginger's fingers are butterflies. So here we're comparing her fingers to butterflies. They talk of a honey gold sunrise. So butterflies and sunrise have that same ending. We're seeing that rhyme again. And then we're seeing that repetition, right? This is what the author wants us to pay attention to. fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. So that is what the author is drawing your attention to, that she's able to communicate all of these things with her fingers and her hands. The next poem we're going to read is called The Giant.
The giant. Dodge, dart, dash, zigzag, slash. I sizzle, sizzle when I dribble. I'm lightning on the court. My team calls me the giant, even though I'm kinda short. The other team might laugh to see a player tiny as a flea, but I'm a rocket, fiery hot. Watch me soar, soar on my jump shot. Stretching, flexing, push, push, push. My ball flies up and in, swoosh, whoosh. I show them all you don't need tall to rule the ball.
All right, so this is another poem where we're seeing the author or the poet draw our attention to certain words because they're repeating them over and over. And we're also seeing rhyme. So zigzag slash, I sizzle sizzle when I dribble. Or sorry, dodge dart dash, zigzag slash. So slash and dash rhyme. I sizzle sizzle when I dribble. So you're seeing that word repeat. I'm lightning on the court. My team calls me the giant, even though I'm kind of short. So over here, we're seeing that those alternating lines are rhyming. So court and short. That's our first stanza. The second stanza, the other team might laugh to see a player tiny as a flea. So see and flea over here are rhyming words. But I'm a rocket, fiery hot. Watch me soar, soar on my jump shot. So hot and shot. Over here, we're also seeing a metaphor, right? A player tiny as a flea. So this one's actually not a metaphor. This one is a simile. So because it uses like or as. So a simile is like a metaphor, except it uses like or as. So we're comparing a player as tiny as a flea. So we're comparing the player's size to the size of a flea, like a tiny little bug. But I'm a rocket, fiery hot. Here we have a metaphor. I am a rocket. So we're comparing the player to a rocket. We don't use like or as. Watch me soar, soar on my jump shot. So again, we're repeating the word soar because the author or the poet is wanting us to focus our attention. Stretching, flexing, push, push, push. My ball flies up and in, swoosh, whoosh. So over here, these different words that are drawing our attention to what's going on, they're describing words, a lot of adjectives, a lot of repetition. I show them all, you don't need tall to rule the ball. So over here, all three of these endings rhyme with each other. Now our next one is called Captain's Log.
Captain's Log, May 12, 1868. We set sail from a port in Spain. Sun high, no sign of rain. The sea was satin, so blue, so blue. Our ship was a bird, we flew, we flew. Just past noon, how very weird, came a sound that we most feared. Thunder rumbled a giant drum, thunder rumbled, rum-tum-tum. Rain was pouring, pouring, the wind was a monster roaring, roaring. My crew, extremely terrified, froze at their posts, pale and wide-eyed. A huge wave lifted up our ship. My feet began to slip, slip, slip. I knew that it was up to me to guide us through that stormy sea. I grabbed a rope, reached for the mast, and got back to the helm at last, at last. Shook off the rain, looked at my crew. Steady, lads, I'll get us through. The crew heard my call, each lad stood up tall. All hands now on deck, we trimmed every sail. Courageous together, we rode out that gale.
All right, so let's go through this poem. Now, again, as you are listening to the poem, you're hearing that rhyme, you're hearing that repetition where words are being repeated over and over again to focus your attention. So we set sail from a port in Spain. Sun high, no sign of rain. The sea was satin, so blue, so blue. Our ship was a bird, we flew, we flew. So the sea was satin. That's a metaphor, right? We're comparing the sea to satin, something that's very smooth and blue and shiny. Our ship was a bird. So that means they're comparing the ship to a bird. That means when we're saying we flew, that means it was going through the water very quickly. Just past noon, how very weird, came a sound that we most feared. So weird and feared rhyme over here. Blue and flew rhyme over here. High, in our next one, weird and feared, we said, and then we have drum and tum. Thunder rumbled a giant drum. Thunder rumbled rum tum tum. So you're seeing thunder rumbled being repeated, right? Because they want you to pay attention to that part of the poem, what's going on. Rain was pouring, pouring. So over here, repetition again. The wind was a monster, roaring, roaring. So pouring and roaring rhyme. You see pouring is repeated twice, roaring is repeated twice. They want you to pay attention to that. My crew, extremely terrified, froze at their posts, pale and wide-eyed. To terrified and wide-eyed also rhyme. A huge wave lifted up our ship. My feet began to slip, slip, slip. So ship and slip rhyme. Repeating the word slip, the author wants you to pay attention to just how unsteady the captain is on his feet right now with all of that rain. He's sliding around. I knew that it was up to me to guide us through the stormy sea. So me and sea also rhyme. Now pay attention. These are all stanzas. Each one of these have 4 lines you're seeing in them. The space between them tells you that the next one is a new stanza. I grabbed a rope, reached for the mast, and got back to the helm at last, at last. So mast and at last rhyme, and we're seeing at last repeated twice. Shook off the rain, looked at my crew. Steady, lads, I'll get us through. So crew and through rhyme. The crew heard my call. Each lad stood up tall. So call and tall rhyme. All hands now on deck. We trimmed every sail. Courageous together, we rode out that gale. So sail and gale again rhyme. So pay attention to these patterns that you're seeing as you go through. It does make the writing a lot more interesting to read. It does give you a lot more to visualize and imagine as you read through these poems.
Narrative and free verse. Narrative poetry tells a story, often has stanzas or groups of lines, often rhymes. Free verse poetry does not always rhyme, can have stanzas with different numbers of lines, can tell a story or express a poet's feelings. Find text evidence. I can tell that Captain's Log is a narrative poem. It is a story of a ship's captain who inspires his crew during a bad storm. Captain's Log, May 12, 1868. We set sail from a port in Spain, sun high, no sign of rain. The sea was satin, so blue, so blue. Our ship was a bird, we flew, we flew. Just past noon, how very weird, came a sound that we most feared. Thunder rumbled, a giant drum. Thunder rumbled, rum-tum-tum. Rain was pouring, pouring. The wind was a monster, roaring, roaring. My crew, extremely terrified, froze at their posts, pale and wide-eyed. Captain's Log is a narrative poem that rhymes and has stanzas. It tells a story. This part describes the storm and how scared the crew on the ship was. Theme. The theme is the main message or lesson in a poem. The details in a poem can help you figure out the theme. Find text evidence. All the poems in this week are about inspirational people, but each poem has a different theme. I'll reread The Giant and look for details. I can use the details to figure out the theme. Graphic organizer. Detail. I sizzle when I dribble and I'm lightning on the court. Detail. The other team might laugh to see a player so small. Theme. If you believe in yourself, you can do anything. Repetition and rhyme. Repetition means that words or phrases in a poem are repeated. A rhyme is 2 or more words that end with the same sounds, such as pouring and roaring. Find text evidence. Reread Captain's Log on pages 320 through 321. Listen for words or phrases that are repeated. Think about why the poet uses repetition. Captain's Log, May 12, 1868. We set sail from a port in Spain. Sun high, no sign of rain. The sea was satin, so blue, so blue. Our ship was a bird. We flew, we flew. In the first stanza, the poet repeats the words so blue and we flew. These words also rhyme. This repetition gives the poem a musical quality. It helps me feel the waves and how the ship moves on the sea.
All right, the last thing we're going to review is metaphors. We did go over this earlier in our notes and while we were reading the poems. Here's a quick review.
Metaphor. A metaphor compares two things that are very different. It helps you picture or visualize. His teeth are white pearls is a metaphor. It compares teeth to pearls. This metaphor helps me picture bright white teeth. Find text evidence. On page 318, I read that Ginger's fingers are shooting stars. This is a metaphor. It compares the way Ginger's fingers move and sign to shooting stars. This metaphor helps me picture Ginger's fingers moving quickly and quietly. Ginger's fingers are shooting stars. They talk of adventurous trips to Mars. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard.
All right, that takes us to the end of our notes, third grade. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.